In the 2000s, a different style of magazine explodes onto newsstands.
Yeah, you're right. The women will catch your eye.
Designed for straight men, Lad Mags helped shape male culture throughout the decade.
There was FHM, Nuts, Zoo, and there was Maxim.
Maxim leads the pack and sets the trends that others will chase.
Maxim was the first beer truck in the desert.
We're here to give other men boners.
Once you're a Maxim, you pretty much made it.
But selling the breezy tagline, girls, entertainment, sports, and jokes,
We were just rude young men having the time of our lives.
Lad Mags like Maxim will end up promoting something much more sinister.
This was a really kind of ugly and dangerous philosophy.
No one should feel bullied or pressured to do anything they don't want to do.
In the 2000s, steal a glance at any newsstand and a bevy of buxom babes will leer back at you. All thanks to the proliferation of the so-called Lad Mags.
Lad Mags were a kind of playful, cheeky men's magazine, like a mixture of these kinds of self-help features for men, risque kind of pictorials and interviews.
Shazam!
Throughout the decade, a mountain of Lad Mags will erupt around the globe, but one title soars above the rest.
Maxim was an enormous hit, of which there's never been another like that since, really.
With 4 million readers in 13 countries, it's the top men's lifestyle magazine on the planet.
Maxim offers men something they have never seen before.
Sexy, useful, and funny.
And will transform the magazine industry while reinventing how Hollywood promotes its female stars.
So when you got the Maxim cover, it was kind of like scoring goals.
Maxim's design is the go-to guide for unenlightened male chauvinists.
It's being produced by a bunch of guys who all think that the reader is kind of an idiot.
But Lad Mags like Maxim weren't just a creation of the new millennium. Their DNA dates back to the middle of the previous century.
A bunny is an American creation. She's a cross between a hostess showgirl and a barmaid waitress.
Beginning in the 1950s, Hugh Hefner's Playboy is the breeding ground for the Maxim of the future. But by the mid-70s, Playboy's global monthly circulation is 5.6 million copies, making it already the world's #1 most popular magazine. But unlike unapologetic porn mags, female nudity is only part of Playboy's appeal. It also serves up award-winning interviews in fiction, reviews of expensive electronics, fashion spreads, and other stories meant to appeal to wealthy straight men. By the last decade of the century, Playboy's competition comes from the more highbrow Gentleman's Quarterly and Esquire.
Magazines like Playboy and GQ and Esquire were aimed at people who either made a lot of money or people who would spend large quantities of money on clothes. My name is Dave Itzkoff, and in the 2000s, I was an editor at Maxim for 3 years.
The worldview that all men aspire to be rich playboys living the high life in the big city begins to unravel by the close of the 1980s.
Black Monday rocked the city, where the Dow Jones suffered the largest single fall ever recorded in a single day.
GQ, Esquire really had not kind of updated their mindset for younger men of that time, and men who did not feel like the life that these magazines was describing with fashionable clothes and cigars and cars was attainable to them.
And those are the men being sought by a new British magazine launched in 1994 called Loaded.
The magazines before were Grand, Gentleman's Quarterly, Esquire. Loaded was a good name because loaded meant, in the States it meant drunk, meant a loaded gun. We always used a lowercase L so that we were different to those slightly pompous magazines that had come before. My name's James Brown. I was the founding editor of Loaded magazine, and I am ready to rock.
The sensibility of Loaded is born of the shifting culture that's happening in post-Margaret Thatcher England.
In Britain in the early 90s, there was a significant sea change. It wasn't a nice place in the mid-80s. There was a lot of heroin use in the larger inner cities. There were pitch battles that looked like medieval wars between the police and the National Union of Mine Workers over the demise of the coal industry. There'd been mass unemployment. So that created a generation of individuals who had no choice but to pursue their own passions.
For 26-year-old James Brown, his passion is to create a publication that will speak directly to everyday lads like him.
A magazine that mixed football, nightclubbing, music, and drinking. Just really, I was putting my life in a magazine because there was no magazine that in any way reflected the lives of most young men in Britain.
As a former music journalist for New Music Express, James has full artistic control over Loaded and goes looking for a team to help him achieve his vision.
I wanted staff that reflected the audience. I didn't want established people. I looked for what you would call frontiersmen, people who didn't fit in. I interviewed them by asking them if they had any drug habits, if they had any drugs on them, if they could give me their drugs. I wasn't being stupid. I wanted to see how people would respond to these questions. The Loaded office looked like John Belushi's frat house in Animal House after they'd had their toga party. The ceiling was falling in. There was styrofoam and beer everywhere. There were like piles of magazines everywhere. It was like a zoo.
Brown's new fraternity brothers do have one advantage. Most other publishers don't believe there's any money in producing a magazine that caters to the kind of men Brown is chasing.
The expectation for Loaded's success was very, very low. The general perception was that men wouldn't read a mass market magazine like women did.
But Loaded is backed by the British publisher IPC, the same publisher of Marie Claire and Women's Weekly. Still, IPC tells Brown that Loaded must sell a minimum of 30,000 copies a month for them to continue funding it.
Well, we sold 65,000 copies the first issue, and it never went down.
The magazine's immediate appeal is a vindication of Brown's formula.
The first issue of Loaded had the actor Gary Oldman on the cover. It was full of stories about cult footballers, cult film scenes, and comedy and human self-deprecation. So we had well over 500 letters in the first week. And they all said things like, "This is the magazine I've always wanted to read. This magazine is me."
And its appeal to working-class guys with modest tastes helps Loaded more than double its readership the following month.
Once the magazine picked up momentum, which was after the second issue, we started to be absolutely inundated with people wanting to be in it. Film stars, comedians, PRs wanted their people in, sports brands. It was really shocking. It was really exciting. It had totally disrupted and subverted the expectations of men's magazine buying habits. It really just cut through all walks of society. Dentists started giving us free treatment. And I mean, the police used to come into the office quite often, and there was a lot of drugs in the office. So there was a couple of drug dealers kind of operated out of there, and everybody would go, "Oh, what they want." After the first time, they came and just said, "Can we get the new issue?" We were just rude young men having the time of our lives. We didn't seem to have any responsibilities or care or concerns for serious things that went on in life. And the readers absolutely loved it.
Within a year, Loaded is selling 500,000 copies a month and beating out the British version of GQ to become the most popular men's magazine in the UK. Soon, other publishers start copying Loaded's winning formula.
In England, there were copycat magazines. There was FHM, and there was a couple of others, like Front and others that came and went.
FHM is a Loaded imitator with a twist, featuring women in its pictorials instead of men. By 1995, that new and improved formula has FHM outselling the still massively successful Loaded. The success of both magazines inspires a publisher named Felix Dennis to get in the game. One he will soon dominate.
Felix was a legitimate insane person who just was brilliant and volatile. He was a legend. He was a poet. He built a forest for himself. My name is John DeVore, and in the 2000s, I worked for men's magazines because I am a manly man. Felix was a former satirist. He had had some free speech controversy in the 70s with, I think, a humor magazine that he published.
It was called Oz, Felix Dennis's first magazine. But in 1971, Felix is sent to prison for violating British obscenity laws with Oz's School Kids issue. When John Lennon writes the song God Save Oz to raise money for a legal defense, Felix becomes a cultural icon. After his release from prison, Felix Dennis walks away from political satire and instead starts publishing magazines about computers and martial arts.
He'd made a lot of money early on doing a Bruce Lee magazine. He was very intuitive to seeing what was already good in the market and responding to it and copying it.
And that's just what Felix does by launching Maxim in 1995. The magazine borrows heavily from both Loaded and FHM, but Maxim will also offer content that Loaded does not.
Sex was not a staple of the launch of Loaded. It was an afterthought, and it wasn't anyway close to what followed.
At the time, internet porn is still in its infancy, so for young men, magazines are still their go-to source for sexual content. And new titles like Nuts and Zoo show actual nudity inside their covers.
And it was the business. It's, to a certain degree, that happens when you sell any kind of sex. Everyone sells sex.
But while there's still a stigma attached to titles like Playboy and Penthouse, Maxim offers men a safer middle ground, titillating photos wrapped in a more suitable package.
I feel like they were sexy, but they were not over the top.
Maxim sells 100,000 copies a month in its first year, well below the readership of both Loaded and FHM. Felix Dennis isn't content with Maxim being third in the UK market, so he looks across the pond to America.
The magazine was the first beer truck in the desert.
And Maxim will print whatever it thinks will make it the #1 thirst quencher for American men.
Maxim did tell men that women were things.
This video contains adult content not suitable for children. Join us as we make the rounds with sorority girls, college cuties, and the girl next door.
In 1997, before porn is a mouse click away, Girls Gone Wild delivers VHS home videos of intoxicated college girls shedding their clothes and flashing the camera.
Call now and get the all-new Girls Gone Wild for the unbelievable low price of only $9.99.
Selling directly from late-night TV commercials, creator Joe Francis reinvents how softcore porn reaches male audiences, becoming an unapologetic multi-millionaire in the process. Also in 1997, Felix Dennis targets the same male demographic with the U.S. version of Maxim, introducing the lad mag phenomenon to American men.
It was Maxim and it was Felix Dennis who got to the U.S. first.
Be first, be best. And Maxim was the first.
Right before Maxim launches in the U.S., James Brown, the publisher of Loaded, says Felix Dennis tried to poach him away at an awards ceremony.
The first time he tried to hire me, I was on acid at the British Periodical Publications Awards. And Felix Dennis asked, he said, "You should come and work for me. I've got a ranch in Connecticut." I said, "What the f do I want to work on a ranch for?" And then later I said, "Who's that guy over there? The round guy with a beard?" He said, "Oh, he publishes Maxim."
Maxim did what Loaded should have done. Loaded did not come to America. Maxim came first, and they managed to grab that market.
Unable to steal away a competitor, Felix Dennis goes looking for an editor.
There was no way that you could create a magazine of that quality without tapping a certain kind of talent. It's not like you could truck in good old boys from Oklahoma to make a 100-page glossy magazine.
Felix picks an unlikely choice, Claire McHugh, the woman who launched the U.S. version of Marie Claire for IPC, the same publisher that owns Loaded in the UK.
that was part of like the sales pitch that got, like the sales guys would be like, we're not sexist. We had a lady editor, We think the first one ever. And I just remember that, hearing that pitch and being like, what?
But touting their female editor won't overcome advertisers' biggest objection to any new men's magazine.
The common wisdom at the time said that magazines were a media for people who identify as women, not men. That men are visual and men don't read.
You had GQ and Esquire. Those had been around for a while. Details, somewhat newer, but also, part of the kind of firmament of men's magazines. Maxim was kind of known as an upstart new publication in what was a fairly kind of stolid, codified field of men's magazines.
Maxim came in with this sort of brash attitude and this idea that magazine design should be bright and colorful, more pictures, fewer words.
And the 9 words that Felix Dennis chooses to describe Maxim are designed to appeal to the men he's targeting.
The best thing to happen to men since women. It is a brilliant tagline, because it's got everything. It's got the hierarchy, it's got smirking sexism, but just a little bit of like, we love women, because the Maxim man loves women.
But before its first issue goes to print, Maxim discovers that the home of the free and land of the brave is not quite either when presented with semi-nude cover girls.
I don't think we've reckoned with how conservative the country was 20 years ago.
In America, it's very important, especially at that time. You want to make sure that the newsstand accepts you, and nudity is forbidden on the newsstand. I am Antoine Verglas, and I was a fashion photographer in the 2000s.
With past experience shooting for the European editions of GQ, Antoine Verglas is recruited to Maxim by a man named Dave Hilton.
Dave Hilton was the art director at the time who, I think, noticed my work in British GQ. Maxim was interested in my style of photography because I was portraying women in a, I would say, sensual way, sexy way. Never too vulgar, but there was a sexiness to it.
That's definitely the one to work with. It's got good, strong eye contact.
The formula for the visuals was to get the reader to get close to the subject. Especially on the cover, it was how to get this eye contact, the best way to connect with a potential reader.
Maxim's first U.S. issue was a colossal hit, selling over 1 million copies. Sales that the UK version of the magazine can't come close to reaching.
America is far, far bigger country than Britain, but it was the success story of Maxim in America that became known in the publishing industry in the UK.
By 1999, Maxim hits a circulation of 3 million and attracts 150 million in advertising, twice as much as Esquire.
There was this sense of fun, and it captured the attention of men at that period.
Maxim's early success in the US helps it do something the UK version struggled with: getting famous faces on the cover.
In Britain, Maxim couldn't get defining icons. They couldn't get well-known women actors, so they just started putting the girl from the Doritos advert on.
But in the US, the cover of Maxim becomes coveted by many famous female celebrities.
So a lot of today's pop stars, or certainly rising actresses, are very excited about being on Maxim, and those people are what our guys want to read about.
I can't even tell you how many covers I did. Multi covers all over the world. There was a lot. I learned from that. I got a lot of fame from that. Hi, my name is Tyra Reid, and in the early 2000s, I was a big part of pop culture. To appear on the cover of a Maxim magazine in the 2000s was a very important thing. It showed the studios, she's hot right now. Let's get her in this movie.
Maxim was a very valuable real estate
for studios and actors who were starring in movies that were making hundreds of millions of dollars. They were billboards, they were advertisements, that's what it was.
Every time the new month would come out, you'd be like, who's on it? You know, because you always knew it was a star. And you always knew once you're a Maxim, you pretty much made it. It was such a big deal to be a Maxim.
Besides Tara, some of Maxim's early covers feature Catherine Zeta-Jones, Pamela Anderson, Lucy Lawless, Shannon Doherty, and Mariah Carey. Then in 2000, Maxim US copies something FHM and Britain had been doing since its launch back in 1995, compiling a list of the world's most attractive singers, actresses, and models.
I was one of the editors who worked on an annual supplement that we called the Hot 100, which was like a separate little booklet that came with the magazine once a year and was kind of like a ranking of strictly female celebrities based on their actual prominence in the culture and also their physical attractiveness. The first or second year that we did the Hot 100, we chose a model named Estella Warren as our #1, and then she was subsequently cast to play a role in Tim Burton's remake of Planet of the Apes. And so for us, that felt like a victory. It was like, wow, we're having at least a kind of modest effect on the culture.
And in the process, it's creating a species of American men known as the Maxim Man.
The Maxim Man was an aggregate of the nerd and I'd say maybe the smart jock, the funny jock.
The Maxim Man shares a trait with the women who appear on the magazine's covers. He's most often white. And the team that Felix Dennis hires to work at Maxim is no different.
A documentary about Maxim magazine has got to be a parade of middle-aged white men reminiscing, right, about the good old days, because that's what Maxim was.
And its offices can be described as a Maxim man's paradise.
Nerf guns on desks, dudes with their feet up on their desks, models walking by. You know, we had a Segway, a crossbow, golf clubs, remote control cars, $40,000, $50,000 worth of liquor. It was a stereotypical frat house, and it was exactly what you wanted it to be.
But soon the magazine will try and mold the original Maxim Man into a new and not so improved model.
I thought Maxim was funny at first. I think the spirit of the magazine started out as Larry David, and then it became Larry Flint. That there was something about it in its earliest stages where it was about a kind of self-deprecating man. But I think further and further editors and more changes of hand and people who didn't really kind of understand that sensibility lost sight of maybe what could have been its purest form. And then it became something, you know, much more sleazy.
Maxim had always given advice to its readers on how to be a better heterosexual man. But in the first few years of the new millennium, it starts to echo a disturbing trend.
I will offend, I will annoy, I will frighten, I will overwhelm, I will confuse.
At that time, we didn't have the phrase toxic masculinity, but that is absolutely what Maxim was an early form of.
Respect the cock.
In the turn of the millennium film Magnolia,
Tame the cunt.
Tom Cruise plays a slimy seduction guru based on a real-life pickup artist.
Ross Jeffries. He says he got tired of being Mr. Nice Guy and being dumped by women.
In the early 90s, Ross Jeffries peddles his techniques on the talk show circuit.
You have to learn how to say no to a woman.
Calling it speed seduction, Jeffries offers to teach men how to sexually conquer any woman by treating her with disdain or ambivalence.
I used to be sensitive. I dated my left hand when I did that.
This idea that, like, if you said even just specific words or phrases to women, or if you negged her, if you were specifically, like, mean or demeaning to her, that would be a way to, like, pick her up.
I'm not here to prove to you how smart I am. I already know that, okay?
Jeffries' disciples create internet message boards so they can share tips on how to get women into bed.
Here's how you defeat a woman. Here are the steps that you can follow. And if the woman doesn't want you, then she's trash and who needs her? And on to the next one.
Soon, similar seduction advice starts showing up in the pages of Maxim.
In the era that I was working there, I think what the magazine probably would have said is that we're going to talk about women in a way where we're not going to worry about whether the language we use might be interpreted as offensive to some. We're going to be honest, we're going to give it to you straight as we see it, and we're not going to worry about the implications of it.
But the real mission of Maxim is less about instructing men how to arouse sexual interest from women and more about how Maxim can sexually arouse its readers.
I remember being in one meeting at Maxim, and I think the topic was like, boobs or butts. And it was like a serious conversation, like boobs or butts. And, I was on the butt side. But halfway through the meeting, I realized I was like, oh, this job is about turning on other men. I turned to a neighbor and I was like, we're here to give other men boners. Like, how can I turn my fellow heterosexual on? And I like to imagine me banging the table, being like, butts. We need more butts on the cover, because that is what I feel me and all of my male friends are into. Let's all go to the steam room now.
Maxim's interest in speaking to the libidos of its audience make it not so different from what Cosmopolitan has been offering women for decades.
Cosmopolitan was a magazine targeted to women who was talking a lot about sex and sexual relationships, but Maxim was the first men's magazine going to that route,
Maxim started kind of copying the ideas that it had seen in some of the women's magazines of the day, the sort of this many number of sex tips for a woman's magazine, those were always kind of framed as, X number of ways to please a man, or what to do with a man when you have him in bed.
But for Maxim, the advice takes a far more aggressive tone.
For a man's magazine, or for the Maxim perspective, it's about, you see a woman in a bar, how can you be sleeping with her by the end of the night? What can you do to lure her in, trick her, or defeat her in such a way that you will end up having sex with her?
Partly that's capitalism. You either sell fear or you sell hope. Cosmo sells fear. You better follow these sex tips or he's gonna cheat on you. And Maxim men's magazines sell hope. You're an insecure, chinless loser, but Megan Fox will sleep with you. These are the two things that we played with.
Maxim magazine.
In the 2000s, whether Maxim is selling hope or desperation, it's working.
Maxim was 3.5, pushing 4 million subscribers. And the next biggest men's magazine in the country would be GQ, that I don't think ever hit 1 million.
And soon, even Lad Mag originator Loaded loads up on the sex-heavy content of Maxim.
Loaded, after I left, became a magazine that later became a magazine under subsequent editors that just had girls in really skimpy underwear.
It's no longer James Brown's original vision, but by then he already left Loaded to become an editor for the British GQ.
When I was there, I controlled the magazine. Nobody ever told me what I could or couldn't put in the magazine or on the cover. My covers would be my heroes. There would be musicians, footballers, film stars, or women we admired. The magazines that came after it, they were magazines that were being driven by publishers trying to make money. I was just trying to get into football for free.
Maxim's Felix Dennis has grander ambitions.
Some magazines, good or bad, are on a mission. And Maxim's mission was very specific, and that was help Felix maintain his island mansion in the Caribbean.
So in the early aughts, Felix Dennis takes Maxim worldwide.
His rapid expansion into a global brand was the interesting element of that story. And he was a successful element. The success of Maxim was what the story was, not the content.
In fact, despite its financial success, Maxim's content makes it a pariah in the industry, earning only criticism from the editors of competing magazines.
Critics have called it visual junk.
There was pushback from the intelligentsia New York. This is tacky, this is not intellectual, there is no depth to it.
But while other magazines cringe at Maxim's content, they begin to copy its look.
They respected the money Maxim made and despised the populism of Maxim. And the industry began to adopt some of Maxim's aesthetics. And there came a time when every magazine began to steal the way Maxim made its covers.
People knew it was successful, but we were not sort of seen as, in any way, the kind of intellectual or kind of social equal to a magazine like GQ or Esquire.
That's because many people assume by its covers that Maxim is just a softcore version of Penthouse or Hustler.
I have a memory of someone in my family telling my mom that I was working for a porno magazine. And I was like, Mom, it's not porn. First of all, they're actors or models, and it's bikinis.
No porn, but Maxim's articles become increasingly degrading towards women. Like this 2003 article, How to Cure a Feminist, that teaches men how to unlock her repressed Malibu Barbie fantasies by buying her a tight tank top with the word feminist written on the front.
The business of Maxim was telling people who identified as men what to wear, what to think, what to say, what to believe.
And in the 2000s, believing it's okay to take shots at feminists is not limited to the pages of Maxim.
Even before Maxim becomes big, you have Hillary Clinton pantsuit jokes. You have Rush Limbaugh calling women who want equality feminazis.
The average size of a penis is roughly 10% smaller than it was 50 years ago. I think it's feminism. I think if it's tied to the last 50 years, it has to be the feminazis.
The cultural politics of America in the early aughts were pretty primitive.
And when Maxim is criticized for coarsening the public discourse, the magazine starts calling it satire.
That's certainly something that some of its editors might say, oh, well, we're just a humor magazine. We're not like these other publications. That's really the excuse of a bully. When you're criticized for your actions, oh, it was just a joke. You can't take the joke.
Shout, talk, shout, talk, shout.
But it's not just feminists who don't share Maxim's sense of humor. The magazine is about to get a right proper slapdown from one of its biggest retailers. By 2003, Walmart is the fastest growing discount department chain in America, with over 3,000 stores and $244 billion in sales.
Walmart. Always low prices. Always.
Its magazine racks become highly coveted real estate for publishers. But Maxim, with its scantily clad cover girls, is about to get evicted.
Walmart has its own standards of propriety, and that if they were going to sell it on their newsstands, they didn't want the cover content, where the photos might be somewhat risque, to be visible.
Facing mounting pressure from Christian groups, Walmart drops Maxim, along with several other lad mags.
Walmart was a difficult place to be there. Even for Maxim, because the cover lines were maybe a little bit too suggestive and too sexually implicit, you know.
Despite the Walmart ban, Maxim remains the #1 men's magazine in both America and the world. And the magazine's treatment of women grows even coarser. In 2007, Maxim editors published the flip side of their Hot 100 list when they name who they think are the 5 unsexiest women. Britney Spears gets criticized for gaining weight after having 2 kids. Madonna is compared to Willem Dafoe with hot flashes. And they compare Sarah Jessica Parker's face to a horse.
The worst form of Maxim, I think, was something that emerged over time. Despite its stated intentions, was still talking down to its reader, was exposing them to a lot of chauvinism, a lot of toxicity.
But Maxim's harassment isn't always reserved for women. Its editors also take aim at the anti-Maxim man, what in the 2000s became known as metrosexuals.
The metrosexual, remember that? Like, real men hated metrosexuals. They smelled nice, they wore nice suits. Of course, the previous generation, the manly men, Bond, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, they were all metrosexuals. And the Maxim man would have rejected that.
And perhaps the least surprising fact about the Maxim man is that he rejects anything that can be considered gay.
Maxim was, homophobic in a sly way, right? Like, I could not write an article or pitch an article about sexual dysfunction. Because to talk about my penis with another man will immediately turn you gay. Like, a lot of the magazine was me being like, who's that homophobe who I grew up with in high school? What would he like?
For Dave Itzkoff, working for Maxim presents an ethical dilemma.
I would say it was a day-to-day kind of self-loathing about working at Maxim and knowing every day what we were going to do and just seeing the ways that it was being propagated in the world and just feeling really gross about that.
So he quits to go write for Spin magazine. His timing is good since Maxim is about to face a series of controversies around the bullying of female celebrities.
There were women who felt that they had basically been strong-armed or bullied into participating in these features, not necessarily by the magazine, but perhaps by the studio that they were working for when they made a movie or TV show. Kirsten Dunst, for example, was a very prominent example.
Kirsten Dunst says she was pressured to reveal more than she wanted in this cover photo, done to promote her film Bring It On when she was just 18.
The actresses from One Tree Hill acknowledging that they felt they had been kind of pushed into doing it.
Pushed into it by the show's executive producer, Mark Schwann, who in 2017 will be accused of sexually harassing 18 different women. Back in 2007, Schwann pressures his female stars to pose in skimpy outfits for Maxim.
These women were basically told, you have to do this. This is something you have to do to promote this film or this TV show. And they didn't necessarily speak up at the time, but in the years subsequently, several of them have talked about their experiences.
On their Drama Queen podcast, the three One Tree Hill actresses describe how they were coerced into modeling for Maxim.
And I literally got told, if you do not go and shoot this cover, we will guarantee you that you will never be let out for a press day, a movie, an event, any of your charities. We will keep you here forever.
Well, I feel bad for the women in that era. Not every girl is comfortable enough in their skin to do that. They don't want to do that. They don't want to get body shamed. I mean, there's a lot that goes on with that. No one should feel bullied or pressured to do anything they don't want to do, ever.
But soon, a technological revolution will do to Maxim what Walmart, Christian groups, and manipulated female celebrities could not. Make them irrelevant.
Porn was always an innovator. Always.
In 2007, Felix Dennis sells Maxim magazine, along with his sister mags Blender and Stuff, to a private equity firm called Quadrangle Group for a staggering $250 million. Felix's timing couldn't be better.
The aughts were one of the last gasps of the magazine business as it dealt with the encroachment of the internet.
As social media sites like Facebook and Twitter gain traction, magazines across the spectrum start losing readers.
The more ubiquitous online culture became, having the internet on your phone, having social media, and just kind of instantaneous 24-hour-day internet access, that was the death knell for these kinds of publications.
Fewer and fewer magazines are being published and read, and it's all going online.
But for lad mags, it's the advent of free porn aggregators like Pornhub and YouPorn that decimate their readership.
At minimum, you could very easily find the kind of photography online that you were already used to seeing in Maxim. that you didn't just have to look at the photos that they produced anymore. You could look at, if you wanted to see actual pornography, that was out there. If you like looking at celebrities, there was plenty of that. If you wanted to see, Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction ad infinitum, that's why YouTube existed.
Between 2010 and 2012, Maxim's sales dropped 20%. So the magazine cuts 2 issues per year, publishing only 10 instead of 12. More enlightened views about lad culture and male toxicity also contribute to the waning interest, especially after a widely reported study in 2011 finds the language used in lad mag articles indistinguishable from the things said by convicted rapists.
What it was really sowing the seeds for was a generation or more of, genuinely toxic male behavior. This was a really kind of ugly and dangerous philosophy.
But as Maxim magazine fades into the shadows of the internet, the culture of misogyny it helped encourage lives on in a new generation of online male influencers.
You can look in any number of places and see chauvinistic, chest-beating male culture that Maxim was espousing.
Like Andrew Tate, the TikTok provocateur who was arrested in 2022 on rape and human trafficking charges, but still managed to attract over 11 billion views for his tirades against women and gays. And then there's incels.
Incel means involuntarily celibate.
We're in a time period of unprecedented male virginity crisis.
If you compare it to 2023 and this new generation of incels and young men who are lonely and isolated and hateful of women, it's crazy.
In the spring of 2014, Felix Dennis dies following a long battle with throat cancer. A year later, the magazine that kicked off the Lad Mag phenomenon also ceases to be.
I felt a little bit sad when Loaded ended. I guess it's like having children. The world had changed, Men weren't picking up A4 glossy magazines. They were staring at iPhones. The world had moved on.
While lad mags are now widely considered a chauvinistic relic of Generation X, James Brown has no regrets about creating the magazine that started the phenomenon.
People in the media and the readers have been prompted to be reminded of what Loaded, when it launched, was really like, which was a funny, irreverent, childlike explosion of energy and noise. I don't have any regrets looking back. I care more about the legacy in the eyes of the readers than in the media who confuse the launch of Loaded with the titles like Nuts, Zoo, FHM, Maxim Front, and so on, which copied it.
As for the copycats, Nuts closes up shop in 2014, followed by FHM in 2015. While Maxim still exists online, its heydays in the publishing world are long gone.
If you were a Maxim reader, you're pushing 50, if not over 50, right? It is very much a Gen X expression of gender. I think the people in charge of Maxim stopped asking themselves, what are 25-year-olds into? Because it was a magazine for young men.
I think Maxim just kind of occupies this one moment where people were looking for something different. It satisfied that need for a fairly short time.
I don't think we did direct damage to the American soul, but we didn't help it.